Welcome back, Geico Outkick Studios. Car shopping can be confusing with terms like dealer price, list price, and invoice. TrueCar shows you what other people paid for the car you want so you can recognize a good price when you're ready to buy a new or used car. Visit TrueCar to enjoy a more confident car buying experience. We're talking to Ryan Glasspiegel now. He writes at The Big Lead, does good work. He can tell us what his Twitter handle is as we get rolling here. But I want to ask first question for you, Ryan. You are a Wisconsin alum. You're a big college football fan, a Big Ten fan, and you have Comcast. What is your thought on this battle between Comcast and the Big Ten since it went public yesterday at the Big Ten Media Days?
My thought is that they better figure this out somehow because I'm in an area where there isn't a ton of alternatives. I tried to crawl away from Comcast a few months ago, and I went to AT&T Uverse, and the way that Uverse works is the TVs run on Wi-Fi, and I haven't had a weather-related television outage on Comcast in like 8 years or something. But on Uverse, the TVs run on Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi glitches all the time. And so the TVs would freeze, and I just couldn't stand it, and I had to go back to Comcast. So I'm really not looking forward to the possibility that they make me leave the house to go watch Badger games.
Yeah, and I think that's a question that a lot of people have had because I feel like there's a lot of our listeners who have experimented, and I was talking about that in the last segment with, for instance, I have a Apple TV, and so I downloaded the ESPN app to be able to watch multiple games on my screen at once, and I found two things happen regularly. One, I would get what you just said, a glitch where my Wi-Fi signal, and everybody knows this experience, like your Wi-Fi signal for whatever reason isn't consistent. And so you'd freeze, and you might freeze like at the absolute moment when somebody's about to kick a game-winning field goal or whatever else. I also found that my internet streaming of the games was slower. Now you write and talk and interact a lot with people on social media. Did you find that to be an issue as well?
Well, yeah. There were times where I would get texts 30 seconds before, for example, a Brewers at bat happened because it's not even just Twitter. I think a lot of the way that people watch games now is with these text threads. So if you're a minute behind the 8 other people on your thread, that's just an untenable situation for somebody like me. And with these skinny bundles, those are a big risk. YouTube TV went down during the World Cup and Wimbledon like a couple weeks ago because the volume of users was so high, I assume. So I think if you're just a dyed-in-the-wool sports fan, especially if you do it for a living, but I think if you're a diehard fan, it's really tough it's a big risk to cut the cord and go to one of these streaming bundles.
We're talking to Ryan Glasspiegel, his Twitter handle, Sports Rapport. I'll tweet it out for you when we put up the podcast for sure. I've got a poll question up, Ryan, and over 5,000 people have voted so far. It says, and the question's pretty simple, would you drop Comcast or any other cable or satellite provider if they stop carrying the Big Ten network? Now, full disclosure, obviously, I have a lot of SEC fans who follow me, so there could be some animus directed at the Big Ten because of the rivalry between the SEC and the Big Ten. But I'm kind of surprised by this in general. 75% of my followers, at least those voting in the first 30 minutes of this poll, are saying no, they would not drop Comcast. How do you think Big Ten fans in general are going to respond if this battle continues? And for people out there who are just waking up and they don't know, the reason why we're discussing this, the Fox Sports president, Mark Silverman, was at Big Ten Media Days yesterday, basically letting everybody in the Big Ten Conference know that their deal, I believe, expires on August 31st. So in theory, the Big Ten network might not be carried on Comcast when the season begins. Now, a lot of times these situations end up resolving themselves. You're in Chicago. You know a lot of Big Ten fans. Do you think there is or are a lot of people who would be willing to switch? You yourself just said, I guess I'd have to go to a sports bar. How many times was Wisconsin on the Big Ten network last year? Do you know?
It feels like, well, so first of all, the Big Ten games on FS1 are also going to be affected. So that it adds another chunk.
Yeah, and that's also a little bit wild. I don't even know how that would work exactly, because I guess they would black those out in Comcast households. Is that how that would? I don't even understand how that would work.
Yeah, and it's also really weird because I can't just go and look at Wisconsin's football schedule right now and see how many of their games are on Big Ten Network or FS1 versus ESPN, ESPN2, or ABC, because they only tell you where the game is going to be televised like 2 or 3 weeks in advance.
Yeah, so and frankly, they may not even know because of the way the draft happens, and a lot of times, networks make decisions based on how good the season is going. I had a lot of Ohio State and Michigan fans hop in and say, yeah, most of our games I know are not going to be on the Big Ten Network, so I would go for the one or maybe two of those games that would not be on Fox or ESPN and go watch them, or ABC, and go watch them in a sports bar. But, if you're Rutgers, I would guess that a lot more of your Rutgers games are going to be on, for instance, the Big Ten Network.
Yeah, maybe it's 4 or 5 of Wisconsin. It's not a really big deal if they're playing at 2:30 Central or a night game, but those games where they're playing at 11 a.m. and maybe you went out the night before on a Friday, you're really not trying to leave the house to watch the games. And if that happens, I assume that'll happen to me once or twice, where they're playing at 11 a.m. on Big Ten Network. Now, you said most of these get involved, but as my friend Patrick Crakes, who used to be a program executive for Fox Sports, said, that Comcast and Yes Network had a dispute in New Jersey that lasted an entire season, and Yankees fans just couldn't see their games. And you've covered this a lot over the last couple months on your show and your website, that Comcast and Fox have an acrimonious relationship. Comcast tried to acquire the bundle of the Fox assets that are ultimately going to Disney. Rupert Murdoch, for whatever reason, had a strong preference for those assets to go to Disney instead of Comcast, and this is just another stage in that battle.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt at all. And by the way, all of the SEC networks deals, I'm told, are pretty much up next year, and that's going to get incredibly contentious because the ACC network is trying to launch into maybe the worst environment for a brand new conference network we've ever seen. Do you think there's much demand for the ACC network, and do you think ESPN's going to run into a lot of challenges next year trying to get this thing rolled out?
There's going to be regional demand for it in like the Carolinas for Duke and UNC, NC State, or in Florida for Florida State. But I don't see anybody in Chicago, for example, banging pots and pans demanding ACC network carriage.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. All right, I want to get into a couple of other interesting issues with you. You tweet, I guess on Monday, maybe on this show, I came on and said, hey, I've got a solution for the anthem controversy. Why can't we just end up with a compromise? And you had the same compromise before. It is end marijuana testing in exchange for all of the players to agree to stand for the national anthem. This was, I think, pretty favorably received. People are over the anthem controversy. What was the response when you found that you shared that idea with your audience?
I did a poll and asked which side would say no, and 2/3 of it said the owners. Now, this would be a tough pill for everybody to swallow because the players would be accused of selling out their beliefs for freedom to get high, and the owners would be accused of selling out their beliefs in exchange for giving the players the freedom to get high. But just look at Josh Gordon and how many millions of dollars that he's lost just because, frankly, of the marijuana testing policy. And he left the Browns recently to go get treatment. Would he need to go get mental health treatment if he were allowed to smoke marijuana? I don't know that we can definitively answer that either way, but we do know that he would have made millions and millions of more dollars throughout his career if this kind of nonsensical prohibition weren't there. So it's, there's some people are so entrenched on their sides of the anthem controversy. The NBA was really smart to avoid this 25 years ago. They got lucky in a sense that the issue popped up during a period where the Democrats and Republicans didn't have as contentious a relationship as they do in this present time. But the NFL has to figure this out before this season, or I think they're going to have some really big viewership consequences.
I agree with you on all of that. Now, another big story, and we haven't talked a lot about this because it just happened a couple of days ago, but the New York Daily News just cut, I believe the number is 25 of its 34 sports media employees. If you're not familiar with the New York Daily News, it's a massive daily tabloid. Used to have one of the biggest readerships in the entire country. Would go head-to-head with the New York Post in terms of trying to reach the masses in the New York City area. What to you is the significance of this decision with about half of the employees being let go at the New York Daily News, including whatever it is, like 75% effectively of their sports department?
It's really sad. They've had financial issues for at least 25 years, so I don't think that you can say that it's a total surprise. They were owned by one of these billionaire owners that everybody seems to want, but he couldn't find a buyer, so he sold it to Tronc for $1. And when you see a company like Tronc that's just known for making wide sweeping cuts everywhere they go, acquire a paper at that price, you know that there's a lot of pain coming, but I still don't know that you can know that the amount of pain that's coming is that your sports section, which has been revered, Mike Lupick, probably one of the most famous sports writers ever, has anchored that page for Lord knows how long. And Frank Isola has been there for 25 years. He used it as a platform to get to Around the Horn and elsewhere. There's nothing that can prepare you for the sports section getting cut by 75% and not having a Yankees writer when they're in the middle of a pennant race. That's just insane.
Yeah, it is wild in general. What does this say about the overall trajectory of sports and media coverage in general? My contention is that, and you probably see this a little bit at the Big Lead, and we're talking to Ryan Glasspiegel. His Twitter handle is @SportsReport. You probably see to a certain extent that the challenge in general is written form. I still write at Outkick, but what people respond to the most by far is my radio, my daily Periscope, and Facebook, which people can watch around 3 o'clock Eastern. Like, that's what people respond to. The amount of people who are paying a lot of attention to written content, I think every year continues to decline. And so, as a result, is the challenge of monetizing it, because so much, frankly, of the advertising market on the internet is fundamentally broken because you're paying based on quantity of page views as opposed to quality of page views. How optimistic, how pessimistic are you? Are things getting better or worse for the written word online?
Well, there was a tweet floating around yesterday that said something like 538,000 journalists have lost their jobs since 2001, and only 24,000 coal miners have. And the implication was, why are we kowtow to the coal miners but not the journalists? But digital journalism jobs, I think, have made up about 2/3 of those losses, because that was specifically newspaper journalists who have lost their jobs. So it's bad, but it's not quite as dire as a tweet like that would make it sound. I don't know that I'm getting more optimistic for the written word. You've written about this a lot, how it's inefficient that the unique page view is the prevailing metric for how web journalists are judged for the merits of their work, because for some reason, under the unique page view, somebody who comes by from Facebook for 5 seconds, he's a reader of Facebook, he's not a reader of your site, and he never returns. He counts the same in the unique page view as somebody who goes to Outkick the Coverage's homepage, maybe not 20 times a day because you're not publishing a volume like we do at the Big Lead, but somebody who reads every post you do all month counts the same in the unique page view stats as somebody who comes from search or whatever. And we keep hearing that that's going to change and that they're going to start measuring total time of engagement, which I think is a much more reasonable statistic for everybody to be judged on. But I keep hearing that, and then I keep seeing that unique page view is the statistic that's cited to see everybody's merit. So I don't totally believe that that stat is going away, even though it should be. You know, it's really I don't think that you can just go into this profession now as you maybe could 10 or 15 years ago with the goal of being just a writer. Although I think I would dispute with you that maybe you personally get more engagement from radio because you're on this massive distribution of Fox Sports Radio and iHeart Premiere. But I find that if you write something that is very original and nobody else has had this opinion or this fact, that it still gives you an enormous amount of power, even if it's difficult for that written word to be monetized.
We're talking to Ryan Glasspiegel. I don't think there's any doubt. What I have said is my writing is like the front porch of what I do. People can access it and they can see it and it can have an impact. But the foundation of the house to me now is writing and is talking and video more than it is the written word. Last question for you. What happens with Get Up and High Noon? I saw you tweeting out the ratings, the two new shows that are on at ESPN. Neither one of them has done great. Undisputed has been doing better. The Skip Bayless-helmed show on FS1. I think The Herd has been doing better. Lots of moving parts here. What do you think happens by the time football season gets here? What's ESPN going to do there?
Well, I put Get Up and High Noon in different buckets. I think High Noon it's gaining relevance in the social conversation, and we're going to have to start judging television shows increasingly on that as these companies start to figure out how to monetize these quick bite videos on Twitter. And I also don't think that they've been on enough. They had 2 weeks off for Wimbledon. There were some days they were on ESPN2. I think, you know, you and I disagree on this, but Eric Rydholm, who's PTI's creator, is running that show. He hasn't had a strikeout yet, so I believe that show will succeed. Get Up is a different story because they've got over $15 million in talent contracts in there. My opinion on Get Up is that the quicker they figure out that, okay, Michelle Beadle isn't a good fit on this show, they've had Maria Taylor filling in for her, and all of a sudden the conversation has a lot more flow and energy. You know, they don't want to get into a Mike and Jamel situation where everybody can throw at them. You're paying Michelle Beadle $5 million. What are you getting for that money? But it just doesn't seem like she's a morning person. It seems like the overlap between her and Greeny is too much to overcome. Now, I don't know when they're going to make this decision, but if I were them, I would plug somebody else on that show instead of her, and I would call it SportsCenter again, but I would keep Greeny on it, and I would keep Jalen, maybe not as a full-time host, but at least as an everyday contributor.
Good stuff as always. Ryan Glasspiegel, Eddie Garcia.